All right, I think we need to get started. Welcome to our webinar on the State Trade and Export Promotion Grant Program. Thank you for being here. We are going to have a nice little discussion today about export promotion in the States and this new grant promotion program. Our two speakers today are Wade Merritt, who is the Vice President of the Maine International Trade Center. He's also our incoming Cyto President. And we have Gene Davis, the Director of the North Carolina Department of Commerce's International Trade Division. And I think we're just going to jump right into it. Wade, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and I guess good morning to our friends on the West Coast. And thanks for joining us this afternoon to talk a little bit about the STEP program. As mentioned, I'm the Vice President of the Maine International Trade Center and also the Vice President and incoming President of Cyto. The Maine International Trade Center, just to give you an idea of what my day job is, the Maine International Trade Center is the state export promotion program for the state of Maine that works with small and medium-sized companies around the state to help get them prepared to do business internationally in a number of different ways, including counseling, international trade missions, and overseas trade shows. I'm not going to go too far into that because my friend from North Carolina, Gene, will be discussing the general services that international trade offices provide. I'm going to stick more to what Cyto does and the evolution of the STEP program. Next slide, please. There we go. For those of you not familiar with Cyto, we're a collaborative effort of the various state-level international trade promotion programs, as well as the Council of State Governments offices in Washington, D.C. We were formed about eight years ago or so with the goal of improving our own individual programs in our home states through the exchange of best practices, skills development, and federal advocacy. Next slide. Who belongs to Cyto? Well, our portfolios are unique to each state, and it depends on whether or not the office personnel changes with each administration or if it's a permanent position. Generally speaking, the members of the Cyto network are international trade directors from each state, so myself and my colleagues from around the country. Also members of the network include state departments of commerce, public-private partnerships, that's like mine. Many state trade offices are straight state agencies. Some of us, however, are public-private partnerships. There's actually 10 of us. And again, as I mentioned, we'll be talking a little bit more later about what the services that the states generally offer. I touch on that in a slightly later slide. In addition to the Council of State Governments and the international trade offices, we're also sponsored by several corporate sponsors. You see those at the bottom of the slide here. Reed Exhibitions, which is a major organizer of international trade shows, UPS, and Peers, which is a major trade data provider that many of our states use to identify clients and potential customers for our clients. Next slide, please. The Cyto leadership is drawn from the members of the organization, and we have 2 board seats per region. These are aligned with the regions of the Council of State Governments. I represent the Northeast, the East region, excuse me, of CSG, along with my colleague from the state of Maryland. As you can see down at the bottom, Gene represents the South, along with Georgia, Midwest and Illinois and Missouri. Washington and Nevada represent the West, and the state of Florida is the president. The president of Cyto serves as a member of the board of directors of Cyto in his own right, and not as a member of not as a representative of a particular region. Our succession is such that the current sitting vice president will become the president. So therefore, I will take on the role of the presidency in April of 2012. Previous board members, in addition to the states represented here, previous board members have come from states like Wisconsin, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. And we do try to move that around a little bit so that we're getting good representation from around the country. Next slide, please. In addition to the domestic services that we provide, some states maintain offices abroad to assist their companies in making export sales. This slide just shows an example of the major markets where states have trade offices. Canada, Mexico, China, and Japan, probably not surprisingly, shouldn't be surprisingly, are the most popular. Not all states have them. In our case, for example, we're just too small. We have no international trade offices. Pennsylvania has many in many of those markets, if not probably all of them. But these are great resources, and one of the beauties of the collaboration of an organization like Cyto is that we're able to pull on the expertise that other states have through resources like this to have access for our companies in other markets where we may not have a presence or a reach. Next slide, please. So just generally, and again, Gene will be talking about this later, what states are doing to create jobs and boost small businesses in the international arena. All of us do, or I should say most of us do do at least some of the four that you see on this slide. Export counseling, whether it's new to export or new to market, there's definitely a difference here in philosophy as to whether companies or whether state trade offices are going to be working with companies who are experienced exporters and are looking for new market opportunities, or going out and meeting with companies that have not done anything internationally and are looking for a way into international markets to increase sales. Some of us, like our state in Maine here, we try to do both, but some definitely have leanings in one direction or another. Market identification, we here do research projects for our companies to help companies decide what that new market is going to be, or maybe what that first market is going to be. Subsidized services or overseas trade shows such as trade missions, matchmaking, joint presences at trade shows, and finally foreign direct investment attraction. Each of us typically have a hand in that, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Next slide, please. So the twin pieces of the state trade programs, FDI and export promotion. The first one, which is a lot easier for people to get their heads wrapped around as far as job creation is concerned, is foreign direct investment. I'll spend more time talking about export promotion, but I did want to mention FDI attraction. Many of our states are active in it, and in fact, from 2004 to 2010, $314 billion in foreign investments made their way into the United States that resulted in the creation of over 630,000 jobs here in the U.S. FDI is an easier one for people to get their head wrapped around because it's obviously a job creator. It's and much more easily measured than an export sale. A 500-person manufacturing facility makes headlines, whereas a large export order coming into one of your small manufacturers typically isn't even a news story. Both of them, however, are of major importance to states' economic development and job creation efforts. Next slide, please. We're here really more to talk about export promotion, however, today, and talking about exports matter and why we should be thinking about supporting our export promotion programs and how STEP is helping to make that a reality. Studies have shown that investing in export promotion is a reliable way to ensure a stable economic recovery and was one of the best, most impactful ways governments can assist companies in making sales and growing their employment base. For every $1 billion of export, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, 10,000 jobs are created. It's also well documented that companies which export their products grow faster, are more profitable, and pay higher wages to their employees. By doubling American exports, hundreds of thousands of new higher wage jobs will be created for the citizens of our states and for our country. Following the math, there was a World Bank study in 2006 that showed a 40-to-1 return investment on every dollar spent on export promotion. Nations that have a higher level of investment show increasing returns on investment for their export promotion program. We took a look at that because, of course, we're always skeptical about studies. We took a long look at that and found that the study actually has merit. Our friends in the state of Pennsylvania, which has a very good trade promotion program and has good resources to regularly measure its success, looked at their numbers in 2010 and actually discovered a 90-to-1 return on investment. The U.S. Department of Commerce, about a month ago at a presentation before the House Small Business Committee, indicated they believed their rate of return was somewhere in the neighborhood of $135 to 1. Even at the low end, even if we just say 40 to 1, with numbers like these, investing in state and federal programs to promote exports really should be an obvious priority. Yet program budgets and resources are being cut at a time when we need them the most. And in fact, it's important to note that U.S. export promotion budgets, combined at the federal and state levels, is equivalent to that of an emerging market and absolutely nowhere near what our competitors, our OECD peers, for example, the Germanys, the UKs, the Canadas of the world, nowhere near what those competitor nations are doing. And with difficult budget choices seemingly becoming the norm at the state and the federal level, the pressure on those budgets is constant and real. In just the past 2 years, state government support for export promotion and FDI attraction has dropped by 20%, and 84% of the states have suffered some sort of budget cut since 2009, ranging in size from a modest 5% all the way up to a 70%. In fact, our colleagues in the state of Ohio recently had their program completely eliminated. This obviously is a case of an elimination, but even in substantial reduction in funding, this directly affects services to the companies that we work with most, which are small and mid-sized companies. My typical client here in Maine is a manufacturing company with less than 150 employees. And remember that these cuts are coming to a program with a proven record of success. Again, it doesn't matter whether you're talking 40, 90, or $135 to 1. 40 to 1 in and of itself is a pretty impressive return on dollars in. Next slide, please. Which brings us to the National Export Initiative. In 2010, President Obama set forth the goal of doubling U.S. exports by 2015 and called upon not just the Boeings and the Caterpillars of the world to double their exports, which is kind of how we have done this in the past, but really put the onus on really where we also agree that the growth area is, which is the American small and medium-sized manufacturer. The greatest potential for doubling exports in this country is with small and mid-sized companies. They also, however, require the most assistance to prepare for breaking into new markets, whether here in the United States or abroad. There's a long-standing history of the states working with the U.S. federal government to streamline and to find efficiencies in export promotion. Some states actually are co-located with their federal counterparts. Excuse me. To provide the most streamlined set of services possible. We've also taken steps at Cyto with the Department of Commerce to put together a memorandum of understanding that would allow for better transparency and regular consultations to identify areas where we can supplement each other's programs, share information, and learn from one another's best practices, and also to avoid unnecessary duplication of services. Next slide, please. So how is the NEI doing? Well, we're on track, but this is a road that frankly is going to get harder as we move along this curve. You can see how we're actually tracking along quite nicely here. But as I said, this is a road that's going to get harder to move along along the curve. In many ways, this performance was sort of expected because we were starting from 2009, which all of us will tell you was a particularly bad year for trade. But to continue this growth path is going to require coordination, and it's going to require resources at all levels, both federal and state. Next slide, please. It's also complicated by the fact that our most major export markets, most of the countries where we would advise an SME to take a look at, the Western Europes of the world, Canada's, are experiencing the slow growth and financial problems that we've been going through here in the United States. Companies are going to have to go further afield. They're going to have to start looking at emerging markets like India, like Brazil, like Mexico. They're going to have to start looking at those types of markets if they're really going to be successful and if we're really going to start thinking about achieving our goal of doubling exports in the next 5 years. And the thing is, emerging markets are expensive markets, and I can attest to that from my recent trip to Brazil.
That's
Next
true.
slide, please. So cost being a major barrier to the entry of small and medium-sized businesses is definitely a knowledge gap, but there's also definitely a financial resource gap. Cost is a major barrier for the entry of small and medium-sized businesses. And in 2009, the U.S. Senate Small Business Committee approached us through the ranking member, who is the senator from my state, Olympia Snowe. They approached us about the creation of the STEP program, which would provide flexible money to support small exporters and be administered by state trade offices, which is an unprecedented state-federal collaboration on export promotion. In fact, until now, there has been no federal export grant programs at all to assist non-agricultural firms. There's lots of money out there if you're involved in farming, lots of money out there if you're, or you can make the argument that your product may be agricultural based. We use it for our lobster industry here, for example. But pretty much if you're not in an agricultural commodity, until now there hasn't been any money to support the export of U.S. products. And you can see the stated purpose of the program here, which was just to make grants to states to carry out export programs for small businesses with the goal of increasing the number of small businesses that export, back to that new to export category I mentioned very early on in the slides, and also to increase the value of exports for small businesses that are currently exporting. That's obviously the new to market approach. Next slide, please. The STEP program was very generous and very flexible. We were actually expecting sort of a one-to-one match, which is more typical, I think, for these types of programs. In fact, the match was set up so that one state dollar would be matched more or less with three federal dollars. It mattered on whether you were a large state or a small state, had a high export volume or a low export volume. But it was a 1-to-3 generally federal matching grant program with a competitive structure, and the match requirements were actually quite good. Of that one state dollar, only half of it had to be cash. The other half of it could be an in-kind contribution. STEP came into effect under the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, and with an authorization for $30 million per year for the next 3 years as a pilot program, and the money has been appropriated for this current year as well as for the next fiscal year, FY12. Grants are awarded to individual states on a competitive basis to increase the number of small businesses exporting or the number of the amount of exports from current exporters in each state. Programs, again, were quite flexible in the services that we were able to provide and the services we were able to be funded under it. And they included things like participation in a foreign trade mission or an international trade exhibition, participation in training workshops, payment of translation fees, being able to use U.S. Department of Commerce matchmaking services or the matchmaking services provided by our own states, or the one that we really liked at the bottom, which was any other export initiative as determined appropriate by the associate administrator, which meant that there was some flexibility in there for states to get creative about the things that they wanted to try to accomplish with this program. Next slide, please. It was set up so that it would be a level playing field, so that the Washingtons or the Californias of the world, the large ones, would not get all of the money, and the rest of us would get not any of the money. 10 states with the highest number of small business exporters could not receive more than 40% of the total appropriation, and you see the list of states here that fell under that category. So that was $12 million set aside for those 10 states, and the balance of that money would be set aside for the other 40. Next page, next slide, please. In addition to that, the other legislative requirement was the federal cost share, no more than 65% for a state that had a high export volume. And you see those determined at the bottom: Louisiana, Washington, Texas, Vermont, Kentucky, and South Carolina. That was determined, defined as exports as a percentage of gross domestic product for each state. Vermont is in there and was unfortunately the victim of this mathematical formula. Vermont has a very large IBM plant that essentially exports everything to a sister plant just across the border in Montreal. So they have an enormous export to GDP ratio and fell under the high export volume. That's why they're included in that list there. Next slide, please. So all of this took place in the course of 2009 and 2010. And in 2011, the program was rolled out to the states in the spring, in April or so. We wrapped up applications at the end of May. We're still waiting for our awards. I can tell you that this was enormously, as we expected, an enormously popular program with the states. In fact, 47 of the 50 states applied, as well as 5 of the territories. We have gotten word that all of them are going to get, all of the applications are going to get some funding, that the competition is going to be based on, or competition such as it is going to be on the amounts that we receive. States applications were largely reflective of the budgets that were allocated. Ours, for example, we have a budget of about $900,000 per year for our trade program, of which $525,000 is state. The rest of it is comes from our private sector. We're evidently slotted for about $164,000 for next year. We're going to use ours to offset costs on a reimbursement basis for matchmaking services, doing some translations, and doing some joint overseas booths at international trade shows. Others may be looking at other programs, and I'm sure that Jean will talk a little bit about what they're planning on doing down in North Carolina. And so with that, next slide, please. My contact information is on this final slide, as well as Sasha Sutcliffe-Stevenson, who is the Cyto Executive Director in Washington. We're available should you have any questions following the seminar, and I look forward to your questions later on. At this point, I'll turn it over to Jean Davis from the great state of North Carolina, and look forward to your questions after Jean's presentation. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Wade. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about some of the things we're doing in North Carolina, just to give you all a flavor of what the programs we're proposing are and some of the things that we're doing here. And I'm sure many of them will match up with what the trade directors are doing in your state. So as Wade mentioned, one of the things we really know is that exporting is profitable for our businesses. You know, on average, sales grow faster, more jobs are created. Employees of exporting firms typically earn, they say, 13 to 18% more than non-exporting firms. And the thing that we've seen in North Carolina is that companies that export have been more resilient with this economic crisis that we've been going through as opposed to those who do not export. So that's why this is so important to us. So let me jump to the next slide and talk a little bit about North Carolina. We're a state with 9 million people living here, a fast-growing state. And in 2010, we exported over $25 billion worth of products and services around the world, and that ranked us about 16th in the country. Our largest export market was Canada, and interestingly enough, China has jumped up to number 2 for us. Mexico number 3, Japan, and France at 4 and 5. So some pretty diverse markets that we're shipping to. And from North Carolina, we've got lots of traditional things we export, such as chemicals, machinery, computers. We're doing lots of transportation equipment these days, but still doing lots of textile, furniture, paper, and agriculture. So a pretty broad mix of things coming out of North Carolina. Let me jump to the next slide. We've done a lot of analysis in North Carolina to talk about the work we do and support the work we do. And so our research has shown that exports support 347,000 jobs in North Carolina and add $30.5 billion to the state's economy. $19 billion of that in labor income for North Carolinians each year, and $73.7 billion to total output. And then, of course, when we look down at the local level, thinking about what state and local governments get $2.8 billion in tax revenue from these companies that are exporting. So a lot of really good points about how exports trickle down through our economy here. Okay, next slide. Obviously, the companies that we work with the most, and I think that my other state trade directors would agree, are small and medium-sized firms that really need our help to hold their hands, to research for them, to really, get them out into the market. And so it's something that we all need to work on a lot. We know that, lots of job creation comes from our small and medium-sized companies. So if we look at actually these are some old numbers, we have almost 8,000 companies exporting from North Carolina, and 86% of those companies were small and medium-sized companies. And while the designation of an SME is fewer than 500, we actually find that most of the companies we work with are 100 people or so, so some pretty small companies that we're working with on a daily basis. And those SMEs generated almost a quarter of the exports that leave our state. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. And so what do we do in North Carolina? In terms of what the International Trade Division does, we help our companies with counseling and referrals. So we really try to pull in all the resources that exist, both state, local, and federal, to make referrals and do one-on-one counseling. We try to find distributors and agency searches, so helping a company enter a market, and imagine if a reseller is the best way for them to go, a distributor, hiring a local sales rep, whatever we decide as a team is the best way to approach market entry. We spend a lot of time traveling around the world with our clients to trade events and trade shows. And the thing that we've really learned is that companies have a lot of interest, but until they actually get out of the state and into the local market overseas, they don't fully understand the opportunities. And so when we take them to trade shows, we're walking the floor with them. We're looking at what their competitors are doing in the market. We're looking at what pricing is like in the market. We're looking for distributors and buyers and resellers. So it really is a fantastic way for us to get our companies out of our state and engaged in the global economy. We work a lot on export financing. Obviously, for many of our SMEs, financing is a big deal. And, we work with companies that say, yeah, I'm exporting a little bit, but it's, cash in advance before I ship. And we talk to them about the other opportunities there are for financing through XM Bank and other programs. And that's really changed the life of a lot of our small businesses who were hesitant to get out into the market, not understanding how to get paid and how to finance their buyers. Advocacy, so we do a lot of work both with our state elected officials and with the feds in D.C. around advocacy. That could be anything as simple as we have a client here in North Carolina who's just about to sell $2 million worth of product to the Chinese. They need to get a visa for that buyer to come into the States and come to their plant, do a plant tour, and kind of finalize the deal. So we'll do simple things like visa letters, or at a federal level, we'll work with the U.S. Department of Commerce to, for example, access their market access and compliance, where people are running into trade barriers that they want investigated by the U.S. government. And so we provide that kind of advocacy as well. And then lastly, education and training. So, we spend a lot of our time with companies that are new to export, trying to help them learn what they need to know to get out into the market. And so, we work with new to export people. We work with people that are more mature and need some more customized training. So spend a lot of time working on that as well through our community colleges, through our universities, through our industrial extension centers, et cetera. And in terms of the sectors that we cover, my people are all based, my domestic people are based, split up by industry sectors. And we found that to be really helpful here in North Carolina because it, helps our clients in those industries know that the people that we're sending out to help them have a background in that sector. And so you can see here on the slide some of the specific sectors we cover, plastics and chemicals being our #1 export. North Carolina is #3 for life sciences in the country, and all the other typical industry sectors you can see there. Another sector that we're working a lot on these days is, North Carolina really considers itself a knowledge economy. And so we have a number of service providers here in North Carolina. That could be anything from an architectural engineering company that wants to build buildings in downtown Shanghai, or a pharmaceutical consulting company that helps the Chinese build an FDA-compliant manufacturing facility. So service is one of the fastest growing exports from the U.S., and we're working hard to try to quantify those, understand who our businesses are, and help those folks get out overseas. North Carolina has 8 international offices, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, an office in Europe, Seoul, South Korea, 2 in China, in Hong Kong and Shanghai, and Tokyo, Japan. And so those are the primary markets that we cover overseas. And a little bit later I'll talk about how we work hand in hand with the U.S. Department of Commerce to help our clients in markets where we don't have a presence, which works out really well for us. Okay, next slide. So we were pretty excited about this SBA STEP grant. And again, one of the reasons we were most excited is because it is focused on small and medium-sized companies, the ones that need our help the most. And so in North Carolina, we've developed a program called the North Carolina Passport to Export Program. So all of our marketing material has nice little passport covers and visa stamps inside, and working on marketing our program to really get the word out. And so using the STEP funding, we're going to roll out a new program, hopefully in September when the money comes to us, and really try to get the word out. I think one of our problems remains that we remain the best kept secret in North Carolina, at least. And I think part of that reason has to do with, we're so concerned with helping our companies that every penny that we have, we want to spend it on researching for our companies or getting them to trade shows. Some real tangible things. And so part of the thing that we don't do well is we do not market to the thousands of companies in North Carolina that there are resources out there for them. And so that's one of the things that the STEP grant is going to help us to do is, let people know that there's a whole team of us out there to help them and walk them through this process, and that, won't have to do it alone. I think an important point about the STEP grant is that we are lucky in North Carolina that we hope to get about a $600,000 grant, and that is because we have a decent-sized state appropriation for international trade. I think that, I was mentioning to Wade before that some very forward-thinking leaders in our state 25, 50 years ago kind of set a path for our state, and we've been able to maintain funding for international trade and global engagement through the ups and downs of the economy, and I really think that's one of the things that's helped keep us strong. And so that support and that funding that we've got allowed us to go after a large federal grant under the STEP program. So I do think that's important. And so the idea behind this Passport to Export program and the SBA STEP grant was that they did not want duplication of efforts. So I've got my staff out there doing this work. The U.S. Department of Commerce has staff, but in all of the states, it's remarkable how people really work together. There are more companies than we have people to help them. And so therefore, we really do a great job, I think, of leveraging federal, state, and local resources to provide assistance to these companies. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that sometimes people think, oh, why should you have a local international trade staff when the U.S. DOC has that? The reality is, oftentimes when we go overseas, as the U.S. Department of Commerce is closing posts, it's my staff that helps, the North Carolina companies that are out there. And so we work really hard to not to duplicate and to work side by side with these companies. So I'll give you an example. We don't have an office in Argentina, and so we're working with a client right now who's doing some exporting into Brazil and into Argentina. So my staff in Sao Paulo is helping that company with their export there, and then they'll be traveling on the next week to Argentina to meet with the U.S. Commercial Service folks there. And so it really is a team approach to how we help our companies. And in North Carolina, we have a really seamless, great communication, and we've been really successful, and we're thrilled about that. So with our Passport to Export program, some of the new things we'll be introducing are some new export education programs. We run a lot of export education programs like Export University through the SBA, Export Tech, sorry, next slide there. Thanks, Jennifer. And so we're going to be rolling out some new education programs. We'll be attending new overseas trade shows. So again, the demand that we have from our clients here is really what drives us towards market. So when our clients say, hey, I've got a lot of great business these days in Russia, I'd love to go to this big trade show in Russia, we say, great, let's get a group of companies together and let's go. So that's going to allow us to travel overseas and do trade shows we've not had access to before. Another wonderful thing that the SBA STEP grant will do is allow us to provide travel grants for small companies to get overseas. Oftentimes when you talk to a small company, they say, yeah, I know there are opportunities for me in these overseas markets, but the thought of spending, $2,000 on a plane ticket and money on a hotel room is just too much for me to bear. And so through this STEP grant, we'll be able to reimburse those companies and really get them out into the market. Next slide shows some of the other things we'll be doing. So website translation. I know in this modern world, people are Googling and looking for products all the time, and so when our North Carolina companies have their websites translated into other languages, it's very helpful for facilitating that international trade. We'll also have access to new data. It's something that we've struggled with for years, and now via this grant, we will have access to peers and other data services so that, for example, when a let's just think, when I was trying to think who we're working with in Brazil now, a furniture company is trying to export to Brazil, we can use the peers database to find who the big buyers are in Brazil. And so that's something we've never had before, and which would be wonderful to get that kind of really detailed experience. And then the last thing, of course, is that it's going to provide us with some STEP staff to really market this program, pull the partners in, pull the resources in, and work one-on-ones with clients. So that's going to be a great thing to get our new program rolled out and help as many companies as we can. And I think the last thing I'll add about the SBA STEP grant is that it's a really metric-driven program, and so we can all be assured that the dollars are going to be used wisely. We'll be tracking everything: how many clients, how many of them are new to export, how many of them are, expanding to new markets, how many of them are attending this trade show or that event. So it's a really metric-driven program that I think is going to, once again, like Wade said, really reinforce the ROI on export assistance. So that's kind of the scoop from North Carolina. I think I'll stop there, and hopefully we can have some question time.
All right. Thank you so much, Jean and Wade. Everyone out there in the audience, you will see your GoToWebinar dashboard, and there's a little box down at the bottom that says chat. If you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to type them in, and I'll ask them. To get us started, both of you discussed overseas trade, state trade offices. From both of you, what are some of the benefits of having those offices, and what trends have you seen in states utilizing those trade offices overseas to promote export?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that first. There's no replacing that kind of one-on-one attention that a company is going to get, and our overseas offices do an amazing job of using, for example, Skype and webinars and other technology to communicate with our clients what the opportunities are. And so I think that's the first thing, is that, a client might think, I know China's a growing place, so what does that really mean for me? And when my client can get on the phone with Marlinda Ma, my person in Shanghai, and Marlinda can tell them about the client that she just met that is in their industry and looking to add this product to their portfolio, it really, takes the business interaction to the next level. And so I think that kind of customized, personalized attention is what really gets our small businesses out, exporting, growing their businesses. So there's really no substitute for it.
Yeah, and I would just add, first of all, let me just say up front, Maine doesn't have any overseas offices, so we rely very heavily on our counterparts at the U.S. Department of Commerce. A lot of states don't have overseas offices, but the same rules and the same benefits that Jean just mentioned definitely apply there, because whether you're working with your own state people or you're working with U.S. Department of Commerce resources, it's really good to have somebody in the market that has local knowledge of the industry sector that you're trying to approach. I love the idea. I wish we had the resources to do overseas offices, because I think those states that have overseas offices definitely have the benefit of the, Jean mentioned her person in Shanghai, that person has knowledge about the state of North Carolina that your typical U.S. Department of Commerce person is just representing the entire country, whereas a engaged state rep really has has knowledge of that state and that state's business community and the people who are there. So definitely critical resources and very good ones for getting in the door, for sure.
Another question. What new industries have seen some success lately in exporting? Both of you mentioned small and medium-sized enterprises. And are there any emerging industries that maybe didn't focus on export promotion that are now focusing on that and seeing some successes?
Well, I would say here in Maine, we've started embarking with our composites and our advanced textiles industries. We actually lost our textile industries to North Carolina. Thank you, Jean. Back in the early 20th century, but there are, and then of course you lost them offshore, so you borrowed them, I guess, rented them. But anyway, we do still have a bit of a textile industry here in Maine. They're not making blankets anymore. They're making advanced materials for aerospace and heat-resistant properties and for the military and that sort of thing. This cluster, as it is, never really thought of itself as a cluster until a couple of years ago when we started seeing some opportunities for them jointly overseas, and we were able to, in some ways, kind of spark the formation of an industry association. It's very loose at this point, but they are out there. And we've got several of these guys going. We're taking a trade mission down to Brazil and Chile in November, and we've actually got several of these guys going. So that's definitely a sector that we have not seen before and have appeared. Composites, I mentioned, they're getting very involved with renewable energy. There's a lot of renewable energy projects going on here in New England and also over the border in Quebec and Atlantic Canada. Building blades and other components for wind turbines and large wind projects fits very nicely with our history of a boat building industry here. So the boat builders are sort of diversifying into other shapes that they can make with their equipment. So those are the two that we've been doing a whole lot of work with recently. So Jean, I don't know how you guys doing.
We've got a couple of interesting things going on. We're seeing a large push by our aerospace companies, and of course some of those are composite manufacturers, just like Wade mentioned, but lots of interest from that industry, both for export sales to the military and commercial sales. So we were, for example, at Aero India in February, in where was that? Hyderabad, I think, or Bangalore, actually, and see a lot of opportunities for our companies in that space. We also have some foreign-owned aerospace companies based here in the States. So those companies, for example, Spirit Aero ships fuselage and wing spars to Airbus in Europe via our ports in North Carolina. So lots of good stuff going on there. Ag continues to be a big thing for us. It's a great industry in North Carolina, and with the growing middle class in places like China, there's real demand for our protein, and so ag continues to grow and continues to be kind of a bright spot for us. And then lastly, I'd say, like Wade mentioned, any kind of environmental technology is a hot thing these days. So so many of the emerging markets around the world have real issues around water quality, around pollution, around all those kind of things, and we've got lots of technology, services, and knowledge that we export to help those places manage those the changes and the issues that they've got with their population growth. So those are three great new markets for us.
Okay, and I think I'll follow up with a final question here. What if say you have a legislator listening to this, or another state leader, what can they do to support export promotion in their state? What are the biggest things that help you in the area of international economic development do your job?
I would say, one of the big things for us is just being aware that this is going on. I mean, we've actually gone so far as to do studies of where our exporters are. We go out to our legislators and say, hey, did you know that this company in your district is exporting? Because 9 times out of 10 they don't. They just assume exports are, you know, I'm sure most of you are familiar, exports are LL Bean. I mean, that's who's exporting. The little guy down the street who's got 50 people and is cutting metal, he's not doing anything. And then you kind of point out, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, he's been selling to Airbus. You may not know that. He's not public about it, but it's important, and you need to pay attention to it. There still seems to be very much, at least in our state anyway, there seems to be still very much the idea that exporting is for big companies and it's not for small companies, and that international sales don't happen for the little guys when, as both Gene and I pointed out, the bulk of our clients, the bulk of the companies that we work with are actually very small. So it's recognition of exporting as a business development tool, as an and as a job creator. As a former commissioner of mine, which is a secretary in other states as well, economic development said, look, you know, if it was a year we had 14% export growth, he's like, if any industry in this state was showing 14% growth year over year, we'd be putting everything we had into it. And this has been the case for a lot of our states. So I would just say recognition of it as a business development tool and as a job creator, that's 9/10 of the battle right there.
Yep, and I certainly echo that, Wade, here in North Carolina as well. I mean, North Carolina is an interesting place because we have cities like Raleigh and cities like Charlotte that are, you know, booming metropolitan cities. And we've got lots of rural regions where, you know, people just don't know that these small companies are doing wonderful things internationally, and that for many of them, exports have been the saving grace for them in this bad, soft domestic market. So I think kind of reframing the conversation that we have around trade and global engagement is really important from legislatures, and people need to be bold about talking about how exports have changed companies' lives. And, you know, the idea is, you know, our companies know that that the world is their competition, and they've got to get out there and you know, work on these things. And so these programs are really important. It's a vital part of a business these days to have international sales. And so, as Wade mentioned, just supporting the programs and you know, positive talk about global engagement really would be, you know, very helpful and supportive of our programs.